was 1922. While in Canada, insulin was administered for the first time to a patient. Egypt became independent from the British Empire, and in London, the BBC was founded. In Jerusalem, our protagonist was born, Yitzhak, who is not him, nor him. Yes, we are talking about him, Yitzhak Rabin. His parents, Nehemiah and Rosa, were chalutzim. In English, we would say pioneers. His mother was called Red Rose because of her militancy in the socialist Zionism. His father was not far behind. He was a part of the Histadrut, the Workers' Federation, together with other greats like him. In 1923, when little Yitzhak was 1 year old, they moved to Tel Aviv. No! Tel Aviv was not like this yet. It looked more like this. Yitzhak was educated in strongly Zionist schools and Tnuot. At the age of 15, he entered the Kaduri, agricultural school, where he met Igal Alon, who would be his great friend during his time in school, and later on as well. Yitzhak graduated from high school with very good grades, and planned to continue studying agriculture in the United States. But something was not in his plans: the beginning of World War II. Rabin enlisted in the Haganah, where he began an intense military preparation and training. In 1941, at the age of 19, he joined the newly created Palmach, the elite unit of the Haganah, from which he fought the Nazis in cooperation with the Allies. He became commander of the 1st Battalion. At the end of World War II, he cooperated with the clandestine aliyah of thousands of Shoah survivors trying to reach Israel, despite the opposition of the British. Rabin was imprisoned by the British on the so-called Black Sabbath, but upon his release, he became chief of operations of the Palmach. During the War of Independence, Rabin, only 25 years old, worked tirelessly to break the siege that the Arab armies had formed around Jerusalem.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
While independence was signed on May 14, 1948, Rabin was still on the front lines, fighting to free the city's inhabitants from the terrible siege they were being subjected to. But not everything was at war at that time. During the second ceasefire, Yitzhak Rabin married his fiancée, Leah, who would later become the mother of his children, Dalia and Juval. At the end of the war, Rabin was part of the ceasefire talks with Egypt. At 27, he had two choices before him: study agriculture abroad or pursue a military career. Understanding the risks the young state was running, he opted to stay in the newly founded Israel Defense Forces. In 1956, as Chief of Operations of the Northern Command, he worked intensively on the fortification of the area separating Israel from Syria, providing protection for Israeli fishermen who were frequently attacked from across the border. Rabin continued to climb the military career ladder thanks to his strategies which aimed to turn the IDF into a modern army, prepared for all-terrain combat and technologically advanced. At that time, he established the computer department and purchased the first Sahal computer. By 1963, Rabin became Commander-in-Chief of the Israel Defense Forces, a position he would hold until 1968. Good thing he didn't study agriculture, right? His 2.5 decades of work in the defense of Israel would have its culminating moment in the Six-Day War. The fighting began on June 4, 1967, and by the next day, the Israeli Air Force had succeeded in destroying most of the Egyptian, Syrian, Jordanian, and Iraqi air forces on the ground. Israel occupied the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, and the long-awaited reunification of Jerusalem was achieved. Rabin visited the Western Wall, also known as the Kotel, and received an honorary doctorate from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in appreciation of his work. But by the end of that year, Rabin would hang up his military uniform, exchanging it for diplomatic garb. His first job outside the army was as ambassador to the United States of America, where he worked to strengthen the bond between the two countries, in addition to contributing with proposals to bring Israel and its neighbors, mainly Jordan and Egypt, closer together. In March 1973, he returned to Israel after 5 years as ambassador and joined Avoda, the government party. The Yom Kippur War, in October of that year, was Israel's first conflict in which Rabin did not hold a military post. He tried to enlist and ended up collaborating with the finance minister in fundraising. The war was very hard on Israel, its armed forces, its society, and its government. After the fall of Golda Meir's government, Rabin was elected to succeed her and became prime minister in 1974. The old guard of labor was beginning its renewal, and Rabin was leading it. Yitzhak would become the first prime minister born in the land of Israel. As Prime Minister, he was in charge of opening negotiation channels with different reference of the Arab world, even traveling incognito to Morocco using a disguise. The elections of that year, now led by Shimon Peres, gave the first electoral victory to Menachem Begin, historical leader of the Israeli right wing. Rabin went into opposition, not only to the government, but also to its own party, from whom he had distanced himself. He only returned to public office in 1984 when he was elected Minister of Defense in the Government of National Unity. In 1992, Rabin defeated Shamir in the elections and was elected for a second term as Prime Minister. During his government, the Oslo Accords and peace between Israel and Jordan took place. It was for these successes that Rabin was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, together with Arafat and Shimon Peres. Around 1994, the second stage of the Oslo Accords began, and with it, the historical Accord of Peace with Jordan. The situation in Israel was extremely tense. The right-wing bloc held demonstrations accusing the government that handing over terrorists meant betraying the country and putting its citizens at risk. On November 4, 1995, supporters of the peace process called for a mass rally in King Square, today's Yitzhak Rabin Square, in support of the government and the peace negotiations with the Palestinians. Rabin attended the event, was its main speaker, and sang Shir LaShalom together with various personalities. At the end of the event, before getting into his car, he was assassinated by a Jewish right-wing extremist who shot him in the back. Rabin died that same night in the Ichilov hospital in Tel Aviv. Today, his name is a symbol of peace and an emblem of possible dreams. Today, his democratic values are an example and his figure is a guide for leaders around the world. Today, his legacy lives on in all of us, who believe that violence is not the way and that living in peace is possible.
Shalom, חבר.